He woke up before the sun, as he did every morning. The alarm clock in his small room buzzed, its sound harsh against the quiet stillness. He rubbed his eyes and sat on the edge of the narrow bed, feeling the familiar ache in his back and shoulders. His body protested, but he ignored it. There was work to do and bills to pay, and a family waiting for him. The small apartment smelled faintly of yesterday's food and damp clothes. He got up, stretched, and began his routine with quiet determination. Breakfast was usually just a piece of bread and a cup of tea. He didn't eat much, but he ate quickly. There was no time to waste. Outside, the streets were still sleepy, the city half asleep. His uniform was clean but plain. He put on his worn shoes, tied the laces tightly, and picked up the delivery bag that seemed heavier each day. He glanced at himself in the mirror. Tired eyes stared back. People often overlooked him, not just because of his job, but because of the way he carried himself, always humble, always quiet. He had learned early that humility was safer than pride in a world that judged quickly. His first deliveries began just as the sun started to rise. The city was waking, but not fully alive yet. He carried food, parcels, and sometimes just groceries, up narrow staircases and into apartment buildings where people barely looked at him. Some said thank you, some ignored him, and some were rude. But he had long stopped being offended. He moved with efficiency, with purpose. Each step, each delivery, was a step toward keeping his family afloat. But beneath that surface there was something else. Something that few people could see. He had a secret, one that he carried quietly with him. A love for music. Not just any music, but the piano. Years ago, his mother had given him a small, slightly worn keyboard. Nothing fancy, nothing big. It wasn't much, but it had been enough. And from that day, the world of keys and melodies became his refuge. Every evening after work, when the city lights glimmered through the dusty windows of his small room, he would sit at the keyboard and play. Not for anyone else. Not for praise, just for the music, for the way it made the pain lighter and the dreams a little bigger. But today was different. Today was a school day. He had enrolled in a community college, hoping to learn, to grow, to find something more than deliveries and tired nights. It was a place full of young people who dreamed bigger than he dared to, and he could feel the difference the moment he walked in. The building was buzzing with energy. Laughter echoed down the hallways, and students rushed past with their laptops, their coffee cups, their stories already in motion. He adjusted his backpack, trying to blend in, trying to make himself smaller so he wouldn't be noticed. But of course, people noticed. They always did. The first day of class had been like this. Whispers had followed him, some subtle, some not. He had caught glimpses of students laughing quietly, glances shared between them, smirks he couldn't ignore. He tried to stay focused, to immerse himself in the lessons, to prove to himself that he belonged. But the world had a way of reminding him of who he was. A delivery boy, a worker, someone from outside their bubble. And he knew it. He felt it. And it hurt more than he would admit. He walked into the classroom and chose a seat at the back. There was comfort in being unnoticed, even if it meant being invisible. The chairs were hard. The air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and chalk dust. Around him, students chatted and laughed. Some of them were dressed in the latest fashion, carrying laptops and notebooks with stickers that screamed personality. He had only a simple bag, a few notebooks, and a pencil. Nothing flashy, nothing worth talking about at least. It's nothing that they would see as worthy. The teacher began the lecture, talking about the basics of business management, but his mind wandered. He watched the faces around him, the easy laughter, the confidence, the way some of them didn't worry about being judged. He felt out of place. And then it happened. A student near the front leaned over to whisper, loud enough for him to hear. Why is he even here? Doesn't he know he delivers pizzas for a living? The words stung, sharp and heavy, cutting through the monotony of the lecture. He clenched his fists under the desk, forcing himself not to react. Others snickered. He lowered his head, focusing on the notebook in front of him, pretending it was absorbing every word. Days like this became a routine. Mockery, whispers, jokes, sometimes subtle, sometimes blatant. The worst moments were when someone questioned his intelligence or his dreams. You're tired because you work all night delivering food? How do you even think you can study? One student had asked, smirking, during a group assignment. He had kept silent not because he had no answer, but because he knew that any reply would only make him the target of further ridicule. He had learned that silence was a shield and patience was a weapon. But inside, he was not weak. Inside, there was a fire. Every time someone laughed at him, every time someone doubted him, the music in his heart played louder. It reminded him of nights spent practicing piano, of the small victories when his fingers hit the right notes, of melodies that spoke when words failed. That music was his secret strength, his private world where nobody could touch him. One evening, after an exhausting day delivering packages and attending classes, he returned home, exhausted but determined. The small room smelled like yesterday's tea and the faint scent of paper from his notebooks. He placed his delivery bag down and sat in front of the keyboard in the corner. The worn keys felt familiar under his fingers. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. At first, the notes were soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper in the dark. But soon, they grew stronger, more confident. He played with emotion, letting the music carry the fatigue, the mockery, and the doubt away. Outside, the city continued its endless hum, but inside that small room, time stopped. The music flowed like a river, spilling over the edges of his life, washing away the ugliness of the day. For an hour, he was free. For an hour, he was not a delivery boy, not a student mocked by classmates, not an invisible face in a crowded classroom. He was a musician, a creator, a dreamer, and it felt like nothing in the world could take that away. But tomorrow would come. And with it, the laughter, the whispers, the questions, and he would face it again because life demanded it. Yet deep down, he knew something was changing inside him. Every note he played, every melody he mastered, was building a strength that no mockery could break. He didn't need anyone to believe in him. He just needed to believe in himself. And the piano was his proof that he could. He practiced late into the night, until the fingers ached and the eyes grew heavy. When he finally lay down to sleep, exhaustion was replaced with a quiet satisfaction. He had survived another day in a world that often mocked him, and he had created something beautiful despite it. And in that small, humble room, the young delivery boy dared to dream of a life where he was more than what others saw. He didn't know it yet, but that dream would soon take him far beyond the walls of the classroom, far beyond the judgment of others. It would start a journey that would surprise everyone, including himself. For now, he just held on to the music, letting it guide him through the darkness. One note at a time. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of his small room, painting the walls with a soft glow. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the same heaviness in his body as the day before. Another day, another round of work and school. There was no time for complaints, though. Life demanded more, and he had learned that complaining achieved nothing. He dressed quickly, tying the laces of his worn shoes tightly, and slung the delivery bag over his shoulder. The streets were already buzzing, even though the day had just begun. Cars honked, people hurried, and the air smelled faintly of exhaust and breakfast from the street stalls. He moved through it all with quiet determination, delivering packages and meals with the same care he always did. Every thank you was a small victory. Every tip, even the smallest, felt like a reminder that not everyone in the world judged him by his job. Still, the classroom awaited, and with it, the judgment of those who saw him as nothing more than a delivery boy. He entered the school building with the same careful caution he had developed over weeks. The corridor was crowded, filled with laughter and chatter. Students carried laptops, books, and the energy of youth and dreams. He kept his head down, trying to go unnoticed, but he knew it was impossible. Whispers had already begun, soft murmurs that grew louder as he passed. Did you see him? Still delivering pizzas and trying to study? He probably just wants to sleep in class. Work all night, study all day, doesn't work like that. The words were not cruel in themselves, but the tone made them sharp. He could feel their eyes on him, judging him before he even entered the classroom. He tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the day ahead. But the weight of their opinions settled heavily on his shoulders. Inside the classroom, he chose a seat in the far corner, hoping to become invisible. Some students laughed, others whispered, and a few glanced at him with curiosity, though none dared to approach. The teacher started the lecture, but the words barely reached him. Instead, he replayed the whispers and stares from the hallway. It was not just the teasing, it was the constant reminder that he didn't belong. During a group activity, the situation worsened. He was paired with 3 other students who had already formed a tight circle. They were confident, outspoken, and clearly uninterested in someone outside their group. When he tried to contribute, suggesting a simple idea for the project, one of them rolled his eyes. "Wait, did you actually think that could work? Or are you just trying to sound smart?" The words were like a slap across the face. His cheeks burned, but he kept silent. Another student snickered, and the third just shook their head. No one asked for his opinion after that. The rest of the session was a blur of laughter, whispered jokes, and mocking comments. Even the teacher seemed distracted. Focused on the students who spoke loudly and confidently, he left the classroom feeling smaller than when he entered. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. He felt a tight knot in his chest, a mix of frustration, shame, and quiet determination. The world seemed determined to remind him of his place, yet somewhere deep inside, he refused to let them win. After school, he returned to his delivery work. The streets were busier now, filled with people rushing for lunch or errands. He moved quickly, delivering packages, carrying heavy bags, navigating narrow staircases, and climbing several flights of stairs in old apartment buildings. The physical work was exhausting, but the mental weight of mockery pressed even harder. Yet each delivery, each small interaction, reinforced something inside him: a need to survive, to prove himself, and to keep moving forward no matter what others said. That evening, as he returned home, he noticed the old piano sitting quietly in the corner of his room. Its surface was worn, the keys slightly yellowed, but to him it was more valuable than any treasure. He set down his bag, removed his shoes, and sat in front of the keyboard. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, as if hesitant. But then they moved. The first notes were soft, trembling, carrying the weight of the day. Slowly, the sound grew stronger, more confident. He played with emotion, letting the piano express what words could not. The mockery, the whispers, the humiliation, they all melted into the music. Each chord, each melody, became a shield against the cruelty of the world. He was no longer a delivery boy, no longer a target of ridicule. He was something more, something they could not touch. Even as he played, memories of the classroom replayed in his mind. The laughter, the mocking comments, the judgment. He had felt powerless then, but here at the piano, he felt control. He realized that their words could hurt, but they could not define him. Only he had that power. The next day, things escalated. One of the more outspoken students made a comment that stopped the class in its tracks. "Hey, maybe he should deliver music instead of ideas," he said loudly, smirking at everyone. A few students laughed, some more quietly than before. The teacher glanced in his direction, but said nothing. He felt his stomach twist, his hands clench. The humiliation was intense, but he refused to respond. Not yet. He knew that anger or words would only fuel their amusement. During lunch, he sat alone, his tray untouched except for a sandwich he nibbled at mechanically. Around him, students talked in groups, sharing jokes, sharing stories, sharing moments he could not touch. He wanted to speak, to say something, to defend himself, but he remained silent. Silence had become his companion, a strategy to survive. He watched them, and though it pained him, he also noticed the way some of them laughed nervously, as if unsure whether their teasing was justified. Perhaps deep down, they respected persistence, even if they mocked it. That evening, when he returned home, he sat at the piano and played longer than usual. His fingers moved with a mix of frustration and hope. The keys responded to every feeling, every unspoken word, every hurt. Music was his voice, and it was stronger than any mocking laugh. He realized that his talent, though hidden, was growing sharper, more precise, and more expressive. It had survived ridicule and hardship, and it would continue to grow. Days passed, each filled with the same cycle: work, class, mockery, and music. But something started to change. A few classmates began to notice his quiet resilience, his patience, the way he never retaliated or complained. They began to watch him with curiosity, sometimes silently wondering what drove him. The mocking didn't stop, but the tone shifted slightly. It was no longer pure cruelty. There was now a hint of intrigue. One evening, exhausted from deliveries and the day's humiliation, he received a small compliment from a stranger. While delivering food to an apartment, a resident smiled at him and said, "You're always on time." That's impressive. It was a simple statement, but it made him pause. Maybe the world did notice, even if some parts of it were cruel. Maybe his effort mattered. He carried that thought home, sitting at the piano with a renewed sense of purpose. The music that night felt different. It was not just an escape. It was a preparation. Every note was sharper, every chord filled with intent. He played with the hope that one day someone would listen and understand. Someone would see beyond the uniform, beyond the tired eyes, beyond the laughter of classmates who didn't know the story behind the delivery boy. Weeks passed, and the pattern continued. The mockery, the whispers, the jokes, they became predictable, almost routine. Yet his own determination grew. He had survived every jab, every sarcastic comment, every stifled laugh. And in surviving, he had learned something important. The world would judge. People would mock, but resilience, patience, and hidden talent could never be taken away. One day, the teacher announced an upcoming school event. Students were encouraged to perform, to show a talent or skill they had worked on. The room buzzed with excitement, laughter, and chatter. Some students planned skits, others songs, some prepared presentations. He listened quietly, unsure if he should participate. The thought terrified him. The mockery he had endured was still fresh, and performing meant exposing himself further. But deep inside, a spark lit. The piano, the music. The countless hours he had spent practicing in solitude, all of it had prepared him for this moment, even if he did not know it yet. Perhaps he thought this was the time to show the world a side of him no one had seen, a side that could not be mocked. That night he sat at the piano and played for hours. Every note was deliberate, every melody a reflection of the week's struggles. He imagined the classroom, the students, the laughter, and transformed it into music. The pain became beauty, the mockery became rhythm, and the silence of solitude became a stage. By the time he finally stopped, exhaustion had taken over. But there was also a quiet excitement. Something was changing. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could turn the ridicule into something meaningful. That music, which had been his private sanctuary, could become a bridge to a world that had only mocked him so far. And as he lay down to sleep, the city outside his window full of noise and life. He dreamed not of deliveries or whispers, but of melodies that could one day change everything. The day of the school event arrived sooner than he expected. He woke up earlier than usual, his heart heavy with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The usual ache in his body from work and sleepless nights felt sharper today. But there was something else now, quiet determination that had been growing in him for weeks. He dressed carefully, though in simple clothes, and checked himself in the mirror. There was nothing flashy about his appearance, nothing that would stand out in a crowd. That was fine. The music would speak for him. As he walked to school, he kept replaying the melodies he had practiced the night before. Each note felt like a tiny victory, a whisper of confidence in the midst of weeks of mockery. His fingers itched to play, to let the music express what words could not. He had been silent for so long, keeping his talent hidden, but today felt different. Today, he would finally let it speak. When he entered the classroom, it was buzzing with excitement. Students were arranging chairs, setting up instruments, and practicing lines for their performances. Laughter filled the room, a mix of nervous energy and joy. He took his usual seat at the back, feeling the familiar eyes on him. Whispers began immediately, some subtle, some not. Do you think he'll actually perform? He better not mess it up if he tries. Isn't he the delivery guy? What could he even do? He kept his head down, ignoring them. Their words no longer held the same sting they once did. He had prepared for this. He had spent countless nights at the piano, learning, practicing, perfecting. He was ready. The teacher called for everyone to gather and explained the order of performances. He listened carefully, noting the timing and the few minutes he would have on stage. When his turn came, his heart raced, but it was not at least not entirely. It was anticipation. He rose from his seat quietly and carried himself to the small stage at the front of the classroom. The chatter of the other students faded as he approached the piano that had been placed there for the event. He paused for a moment, looking at the audience. Faces turned toward him, some curious, some skeptical, some openly doubtful. He could feel their eyes, their whispers, but he let it wash over him. He seated himself at the piano, placed his fingers on the keys, and took a deep breath. The first note sounded soft, almost hesitant. The room went silent, as if music had created a vacuum around him. He continued, letting the melody flow naturally, each note carrying a piece of his story, the long nights delivering food, the exhaustion, the whispers of ridicule, and the secret dreams he had nurtured quietly. The melody was gentle but powerful, filled with emotion. The students who had mocked him leaned forward, their laughter fading, replaced by something else's curiosity. Disbelief, admiration. They had never heard anything like this before. The quiet delivery boy, the one they had dismissed, was creating music that moved them, that spoke directly to something they could not put into words. He played for several minutes, losing himself in the music. It was as if the piano had become an extension of himself, each note expressing years of struggle, resilience, and hope. He felt the tension in his body ease with every chord. The room was no longer filled with judgment. It was filled with sound, with beauty, with a story told in music. When the final note faded, there was a pause so complete it almost hurt. Then, slowly, the classroom erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in genuine applause. Students who had whispered about him, who had doubted him, now looked at him with wide eyes. Some had tears in their eyes. The teacher, usually reserved and serious, smiled with genuine admiration. He rose from the piano, a small smile forming on his face. He had done it. For the first time, he had shown the world who he really was, and the world had listened. The applause continued, louder now, as if they could not stop themselves. Some students came forward, shaking their heads in amazement, muttering words of praise. You play so beautifully," one whispered. "How long have you been practicing?" Another asked, still in disbelief. He shrugged quietly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "A long time," he said softly. He did not boast, did not seek attention. He simply acknowledged the truth. Music had been his companion, his refuge, and now it was his voice. After the event, students approached him, asking questions, complimenting his skill, some even apologizing for the earlier mockery. He accepted it gracefully, knowing that their opinions were no longer capable of hurting him. He had faced their judgment, and he had emerged stronger. That evening, returned home, still buzzing with the energy of the performance. He set down his delivery bag, removed his shoes, and approached his piano once more. The keys felt warmer now, familiar yet new. He played again, not for an audience this time, but for himself. Each note was filled with a sense of possibility, a sense that the world was no longer entirely closed to him. Days turned into weeks, and the performance began to change things in ways he had not expected. Some students who had mocked him now sought his guidance for music, for inspiration, for advice. The teacher invited him to perform again at school events. Even in his regular classes, the whispers were replaced with quiet respect. The delivery boy who had been invisible was slowly becoming someone people noticed for reasons beyond judgment and mockery. Yet even with recognition, he remained humble. He continued his deliveries, continued his classes, and continued practicing. Fame, attention, or praise were not his goals. Music had always been about expression, about coping, about hope. The accolades were simply a reflection of what he had always known, that talent. Dedication and perseverance could never be hidden forever. One afternoon, as he walked home after class, a group of students approached him. They had smiles that were no longer mocking. "We didn't expect you to be that good," one said. "Honestly, we judged you too quickly," he nodded, smiling quietly. "It's okay. Everyone learns in their own time," another added. "You should play more often. People need to hear this." He felt a warmth in his chest, not from the praise, but from the realization that perception could change. People were capable of seeing beyond appearances if given the chance, and he had given them that chance through his music, through his courage, through his refusal to hide anymore. That night, he sat at the piano, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the exhaustion, the ridicule, the loneliness, and the long nights of practice. Every struggle had led to this moment. Every harsh word had fueled the fire within him. He played for hours, each melody a reflection of his growth, a celebration of his perseverance, and a quiet promise to himself that he would continue on this path. No matter what challenges came next, even as his fingers moved across the keys, he thought about the future. Music had given him a voice when the world had tried to silence him. It had given him strength when he had felt weak, and it had given him hope when he had nearly lost it. He knew that the road ahead would still have difficulties, judgment, doubt, and obstacles, but he also knew something powerful. He could face them. He had survived ridicule, and he had emerged not broken, but stronger, more determined, and more certain of who he was. The piano had done more than reveal his talent. It had revealed his courage, his resilience, and his worth. And as he played, the music flowed through him, through the room, and out into the world beyond. It carried a message not just for the classroom that had laughed, but for anyone who had ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or mocked. That hidden talents, quiet determination, and unwavering hope can change everything. By the time he finally rested his hands, the night was deep, and the city outside was asleep. He sat back, closed his eyes, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he was not defined by work, by appearances, or by others' opinions. He was defined by his courage, his heart, and the music that had always been his true self. And in that moment, he realized that this was only the beginning. The classroom had been just the first stage, the first audience. There was a world beyond, full of possibilities, full of ears ready to listen, full of hearts ready to understand. The journey that had started with mockery was now moving toward something extraordinary. The piano had changed everything, not just for him, but for the way the world would see him from this day forward. The days after the school performance were unlike any he had experienced before. He walked into the classroom and immediately sensed the change. The whispers and mocking glances that had followed him for weeks were gone, replaced by quiet curiosity and, in some cases, genuine admiration. Some students nodded politely as he passed, others gave small smiles, and a few even asked questions about his performance. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but it was enough to make him feel lighter. As if the heavy weight of ridicule that had pressed down on him for so long was finally lifting, he took his usual seat, though it felt different this time. The room no longer felt hostile. It felt like a space where he could belong, even if only a little. The teacher glanced at him with what seemed like newfound respect, acknowledging him with a small nod before continuing the lecture. He felt a quiet warmth in his chest, not from pride, but from the simple realization that things could change. People could change. Even the world could shift its gaze. Sometimes when least expected. During a group discussion that day, he noticed the difference most clearly. The same classmates who had once dismissed his ideas now paused to listen when he spoke. They didn't always agree, but they gave him space to be heard. One student, who had been especially outspoken in mocking him, leaned over quietly and whispered, "Your point makes sense. I didn't expect it, but it does." He smiled faintly in return, not needing to respond. He had learned that acknowledgement did not always need words. Sometimes, the mere act of being heard was enough, The small victories continued in the following weeks. Students who had once ignored him began asking for help in subjects they struggled with, knowing that he was diligent and thoughtful. They approached him with quiet respect rather than casual dismissal. Some asked about his piano performance, curious about how someone so quiet and reserved could create something so moving. He answered politely, explaining that it was simply practice, dedication, and passion. There was no boastfulness, no need to prove himself further. The music had already spoken. Even the teacher began to treat him differently. Where before, he had often felt overlooked, and the teacher would ask for his opinion during lessons, occasionally inviting him to share insights or examples from his own life. These gestures were small, but they carried immense significance. They were proof that effort, patience, and persistence could eventually command attention. Even in places where judgment had once been harsh outside the classroom, the change was not as dramatic, but it was noticeable. While walking to deliveries, some neighbors who had seen him perform at the school event waved or nodded in recognition. Others made small comments of encouragement, saying things like, "We saw you play at school. You have a real gift." Even though he remained humble, these words carried a quiet power. They reminded him that talent, when nurtured, had the ability to cross boundaries and connect with people beyond immediate circles. Despite the growing respect, he continued to face challenges. Work remained exhausting, and balancing school, deliveries, and practice demanded every ounce of energy he had. Sometimes after a long day, he would collapse into his small room. Too tired even to eat, yet he always returned to the piano. It had become his anchor, his constant, and his reminder of why he kept pushing forward. Each note he played was a reaffirmation of his worth, a quiet rebellion against the doubts that had once plagued him. One afternoon, the teacher approached him quietly after class. "I wanted to say, your performance was remarkable," the teacher said. "I think others could learn a lot from your dedication. Have you considered performing more regularly? There might be events at school where your talent could inspire others." He felt a flush of surprise. Recognition from someone he had long respected was deeply meaningful. He nodded slowly, considering the possibility. It wasn't about fame or applause. It was about using his gift to create something positive. To show others that persistence and passion could overcome obstacles, his classmates began to see this too. One by one, small opportunities appeared. He was invited to play at a school fundraiser, then at a local community event. Each invitation felt like a step forward, a bridge between the quiet life he had always known and the wider world that now seemed interested in listening. The nervousness remained, but it was tempered by confidence. He had faced ridicule, and now he faced anticipation. The stakes were higher, but so was his determination. At the same time, friendships began to form. Students who had once ignored or mocked him approached him with genuine interest, not in a way that felt performative, but with curiosity about his life, his work, and his music. They asked questions about his daily routine, his practice habits, and even his experiences balancing work and school. He answered honestly, finding that some of them related to his struggles in ways he hadn't expected. There was a shared understanding, a recognition that life often demanded more than people could give, and that resilience was a quality worth respecting. Even small gestures of inclusion felt profound. Being invited to join study groups, being asked for advice, and being acknowledged in casual conversation created a sense of belonging he had rarely experienced. He remained humble, knowing that respect earned through genuine effort was far more meaningful than any superficial approval. The classroom had become not just a place of learning, but a place of growth where recognition was given not for appearances, but for action and dedication. He also noticed the effect his presence had on others. Some students who had been shy or unsure began exploring their own talents, inspired by his quiet determination. The idea that effort, not circumstance, defined potential seemed to ripple outward. It was subtle, but he could see it in the way people approached him with curiosity and in the questions they asked about his practice. Even those who had once mocked him began to reconsider their own assumptions about others. Ability's life outside school remained demanding. Deliveries continued, often requiring him to wake before sunrise and return late in the evening. There were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, when the weight of responsibility felt unbearable. But the growing recognition, the small victories, and the knowledge that his talent mattered kept him moving forward. He had learned to navigate the world with quiet resilience, finding balance between work, study, and passion. One evening, after a particularly long day of deliveries and classes, he returned home and sat at his piano. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. He played slowly, letting the music flow without pressure, without expectation. Each note carried the experiences of the past weeks, the ridicule, the exhaustion, the recognition, and the small but meaningful connections he had forged. The music was no longer just a refuge. It had become a statement, a reflection of his journey, and a message to the world that perseverance could triumph over judgment. He thought about the path that had led him here. The early mornings, the long hours, the mockery, and the exhaustion had all been part of the process. Without them, he realized, he would not have developed the patience, resilience, and focus that now defined him. Every challenge had shaped him. Every insult had strengthened him. And every late night of practice had prepared him for moments like this. Opportunities continued to appear, each building on the last. Invitations to perform at small events gradually turned into invitations to larger venues. Teachers encouraged him to participate in regional competitions. Students who had once doubted him began seeking his advice on music and school projects. Each step felt like a confirmation that his efforts were meaningful, that the hours of struggle had not been wasted, and that his talent had the power to connect with people in ways he had never imagined. Despite all this, he remained grounded. He knew that recognition could be fleeting, that admiration could fade, and that challenges would never truly disappear. What mattered most was not the applause, the invitations, or the small victories. It was the dedication to continue, the persistence to keep showing up, and the courage to embrace his talent fully. He also realized that respect earned through effort was more enduring than respect given out of fear or obligation. The small changes in the classroom, the quiet acknowledgement from students and teachers, and the opportunities to perform were meaningful precisely because they reflected genuine appreciation for his dedication and skill. It was not about being noticed. It was about being understood. As the weeks passed, he became more comfortable in his role. He continued to deliver, to study, and to practice, but now there was a sense of purpose intertwined with each task. The deliveries were still necessary, but they were no longer the sole definition of his life. The classroom was still challenging, but it had become a space of possibility. And the piano, which had once been a refuge from mockery, had become a bridge to a future he had only begun to imagine. One afternoon, after finishing a practice session, he was approached by a small group of students. They spoke with quiet respect, asking about his process, his inspirations, and the hours he dedicated to learning music. They listened intently as he shared, absorbing not just the words, but the dedication and passion behind them. He realized that through his persistence, he had not only earned respect, but had also inspired others to pursue their own hidden talents. That night, as he sat in the quiet of his room, fingers resting lightly on the piano keys, he reflected on how far he had come. The mockery that had once defined his days had faded into the past. It had not disappeared entirely, but its power over him had diminished. In its place was something stronger: resilience, recognition, and the knowledge that his efforts mattered. He played softly, each note carrying gratitude for the journey and hope for what lay ahead. The piano had transformed his life, revealing not just talent, but courage, determination, and the quiet strength to endure and thrive. He knew that this was only the beginning, that more challenges and opportunities would come, but he also knew that he was ready. He had faced mockery, hardship, and doubt and had emerged, not broken, but stronger, and as the final note echoed through the room, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The delivery boy who had once been invisible had become someone people listened to, respected, and believed in. His life was changing, one small opportunity at a time. And the music that had always been his secret was now leading him toward a future filled with possibility. He woke up feeling the usual heaviness in his body. But today there was something different. The air in his small room felt lighter somehow, carrying a sense of quiet possibility. He rubbed his eyes, stretched, and glanced at the piano in the corner. For weeks it had been his refuge, his companion through long nights and difficult days. But now it felt more than that. It felt like a bridge to a world that had begun to see him differently. At school, the difference was immediate. The hallway was still crowded, buzzing with students rushing to class, but their energy toward him had shifted. Where once there had been whispers of doubt and mocking glances, there was now curiosity, a hint of respect. Some nodded as he passed, others offered small smiles, and a few even approached to ask questions about his piano performance. He moved through it all quietly, taking in the change without letting it overwhelm him. Entering the classroom, he felt a subtle tension shift in the air. The seats that had once felt hostile now felt less so. He chose his usual spot at the back, but it no longer felt like a place of hiding. The teacher's gaze met his with a quiet acknowledgement, a nod that said, without words, that they had seen something worth noticing. Even small gestures like this mattered. They reminded him that persistence and dedication could eventually break through the barriers of judgment.